say about Trump's influence on the world stage.
He said Russia was afraid of him. China was afraid of him. Everybody was afraid of him. Nothing was going to happen. The whole world was at peace. And now the world is blowing up around us. All of these things that you read about were not going to happen. Under President Bush, Russia invaded Georgia. Under President Obama, Russia took Crimea. Under the current administration, Russia is after all of Ukraine. Under President Trump, Russia took nothing.
So, Professor Murcia, the constant talk about victimhood at home within the United States, but the assertion of almost miraculous strength on the global stage, how do those two things work in concert within Trump's rhetoric?
Yeah, so the victimage gives him strength. That may seem contradictory, but again, that's the way that authoritarian fascist leaders have always presented themselves. They are these heroic victims. And because they are so strong, because they are such, fighters, they have this indomitable spirit, right? They are, the Hegelian Übermensch. They are the one who, has the heroic quest that they will save the nation. It's another thing that Trump has always done, which is to anchor to authoritarians. In 2016, it was Putin. Remember, Putin thinks, that he's so smart, and Putin thinks that he's so great, and all of those kinds of things. So here he's having Orban essentially give him an endorsement, right, by telling this story and anchoring to his authority. It's a very interesting thing when a presidential candidate is constantly praising authoritarian leaders of other regimes. Mm-hmm. It's not something we like to see in America.
All right, we have just a few minutes left. So, Jonathan, I want to talk about what we might see in the coming weeks and months. But to your point earlier, that conventions are aspirational projections, right, of what a party and its candidate or its nominee believes it can bring to America or for Americans. And on that point, let's listen to how Trump ended his speech, talking about how if he's returned to the White House, America will once again be great.
America's future will be bigger, better, bolder, brighter, happier, stronger, freer, greater, and more united than ever before. And quite simply put, we will very quickly make America great again. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Wisconsin. God bless you.
So, Jonathan, I think that a lot of convention speeches are deliberately thin on actual policy because that's kind of by design. But it seemed very interesting here because how much of what we heard over the course of the week and in Trump's speech, how far is it from the actual policies that a Trump-Vance ticket would bring to the White House? And do you think that basically, ultimately, this speech isn't going to matter much on the campaign trail because will more focus be put on those actual policies?
Well, let me take your second question. I don't even think that this is a policy-dominated election. I don't think people are going to focus on the policies that much. I mean, yes, I think some pocketbook issues will shape this election. We are in a 19th century style era of identity politics now. People vote there based on their identity, just like they did after the Civil War. And 90% of the country has decided on Donald Trump. And this is an election that's mostly about Donald Trump. People know how they feel, okay? And I think that's what's driving this election. I think most folks' minds are made up, regardless of any convention speech. To take your first question, like the presentation of a party that is channeling the spirit of the working man is obviously designed for political sensibilities. And I think some cultural issues. Republicans have become more aligned now with non-college voters. The challenge for Republicans is like their economic supporters, i.e., their donors, and really the beating heart of their rank and file activists are still Republicans, and they don't want sort of economic intervention. They mostly want deregulation and then tax cuts, and so that's what you're almost certainly going to get. Now, with Donald Trump, there may be some tariffs, there may be some talk of trade wars, and obviously that scares the Wall Street Journal crowd. But I think, yeah, to your point, you're mostly getting a version of what the Republican Party has been dressed up now with a hard hat.
Well, Jonathan Martin, senior political columnist and politics bureau chief for Politico, joining us from Milwaukee. Thank you so much for being with us today, Jonathan.
Thanks for having me, guys.
And Jennifer Murcia, professor of communication and journalism at Texas A&M and author of Demagogue for President, the rhetorical genius of Donald Trump, joining us from College Station, Texas. Professor Murcia, it's been great to have you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm Meghna Chakrabarty. This is On Point.
On Point is a production of WBUR Boston and is distributed by APM, American Public Media.
This is KUOW FM Seattle, KUOW Tumwater, and KQOW Bellingham. Coming up in a few minutes, it's KUOW's Week in Review. To tell us more of what's in store for us on today's show is host Bill Radke.
Hi, thank you. I guess the fact that you can hear my voice means KUOW is not knocked off the air by the global technology outage, so we can focus on the news. Like, how does the national political scene affect Washington State? A Seattle police officer fired, a Seattle statue stolen, Seattle street racing penalized. We'll discuss the news of the week and give you something to smile about if you'll stay tuned.
Hi, I'm Kim Malcolm, local host of All Things Considered. Time is precious, and we want to make the most of it. That's what we do together weekday afternoons. We look at what happened today and why it matters. We connect you with trend-setting artists, writers, and musicians, bringing the best of the creative world right to you. It's a meaningful way to get the big picture without the hype. Join us every weekday starting at 3 here on KUOW.
Support for KUOW comes from Seattle Theater Group, presenting Funny Girl, the Broadway musical comedy featuring the classic songs Don't Rain on My Parade, I'm the Greatest Star, and People. Funny Girl plays the Paramount Theater September 24th through the 29th. More at stgpresents.org. And from Underdog EV, specializing in installation of electric vehicle charging stations for homeowners who have street parking. Underdog EV prioritizes cable management and site integrity to keep city sidewalks clear of cables. More information at underdogev.com. KUOW.com.
High expected today, about 83, 88 tomorrow, 82 on Sunday. Currently it's 72. It's 12:01.
Live from NPR News, I'm Lakshmi Singh. A massive IT outage is still affecting industries and government services around the globe, from banks to flights. The cybersecurity company CrowdStrike blames the cascading disruptions on a defect found in a single content update for Windows. In a posting this afternoon on the social media platform X, the CEO of Microsoft says the tech giant's working closely with CrowdStrike to provide technical guidance and support to clients. The Biden re-election campaign says the president, who's recovering from COVID, will return to the campaign trail next week. But more congressional Democrats are urging Biden to step aside over concerns about his mental acuity. Here's NPR's Deirdre Walsh.
Democrats I talked to say the former speaker is working behind the scenes very deliberately, diplomatically. Another influential leader weighing in with Biden is former President Obama. A source familiar with his thinking tells NPR Obama views himself as a sounding board with his former vice president and is very protective of Biden's legacy.
Meanwhile, former President Donald Trump and other Republicans continue to imbue the attempted assassination last Saturday with religious meaning. NPR's Jason DeRose reports that language continued during Trump's speech at the Republican National Convention last night.
During his more than 90-minute-long acceptance speech, Donald Trump began by making calls for unity, saying he wanted to be a president for all Americans. While talking about the attempt on his life Saturday, he described feeling the bullet hit his ear and seeing blood everywhere.
In a certain way, I felt very safe because I had God on my side. I felt that.
Since the assassination attempt and throughout the convention, GOP and evangelical leaders have been saying the fact that Trump survived is a sign God wants him to be president. Advocates for religious liberty and the separation of church and state find that language alarming. Jason DeRose, NPR News.
The Treasury Department says it's concerned about a new Florida law that restricts banks from considering environmental, social, and other non-financial factors in making investments. Here's NPR's Greg Allen.
In a letter sent to members of Congress, the Treasury Department says a Florida law and a similar one in Tennessee make it harder for financial institutions to guard against illegal activity that could harm national security. A law signed in May by Governor Ron DeSantis says it's a, quote, unsafe and unsound practice for banks to consider non-quantitative factors in making investment decisions. The measure also says a financial institution can't look at a person's affiliations or business sector. The Treasury Department says those regulations undermine a bank's ability to comply with anti-terrorism and money laundering regulations. DeSantis has said the law is necessary to protect access to the financial sector for businesses, including firearms and private prison companies. Greg Allen, NPR News, Miami.
The Dow is down 342 points. This is NPR News.
This is KUOW News. I'm Paige Browning in Seattle. A Christian homeless shelter is challenging a Washington state anti-discrimination law today over hiring gay and transgender people. Today, the shelter, Union Gospel Mission in Yakima, is asking the Washington Supreme Court to take their case. A lower court previously dismissed their lawsuit. The case rose out of a 2017 lawsuit filed by a bisexual Christian man in Seattle who was denied a job. He says his sexuality was the reason he was rejected for a position as an attorney at a legal aid clinic operated by the Union Gospel Mission in Seattle. Washington has an anti-discrimination law about hiring, but it exempts religious nonprofits. Washington State Ferries has edged closer to rolling out new vessels. Today, the ferry system announced it selected the company ABB as the leader for electrifying the ferries. The state still needs to choose a ferry builder, which will happen next year. When those future ferries are built, ABB will design the parts to make them run on electric energy. The state has a bid out to build 5 hybrid electric ferries, with hopes the first will be on the water in 2028. King County officials are unveiling a new strategy to address the hotter summers fueled by climate change. Amy Radel reports.
King County officials say planning for future heat waves includes more cooling centers and portable air conditioning for vulnerable people in their homes. For people without shelter, Tony Machacha with the King County Regional Homelessness Authority helped formulate the strategy.
It's good to be able to just think about everybody as residents and not keep on bifurcating, going the homeless and those with homes. Like when it comes to emergencies like heat, we're all under the same heat dome, so it's good we're thinking together like that.
The county strategy calls for providing unsheltered people with cooling kits with things like water and wet towels. King County officials said expanding access to green space is another one of their priorities, especially in areas with more pavement than parks. Amy Radel, KUOW News.
This is KUOW.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include BetterHelp, committed to supporting mental health through therapy. Clients are matched with one of 35,000 therapists and can communicate via video, chat, or phone at betterhelp.com/public.
Welcome to Friday. Welcome to KUOW's Week in Review. I'm Bill Radke. It's not really Microsoft's fault, is it? Cybersecurity firms' software update crashed Windows computers globally. Anyway, we might say a little more about that. We'll talk about how the national political upheaval might affect us here in the upper left-hand corner, and more of the week's news to come here on Week in Review with my panel. Publicola co-founder and publisher and 1/3 of the Seattle Nice podcast, Erica Barnett. Welcome back.
Thanks, Bill. Good to be here.
Washington Policy Center senior researcher, Paul Guppy. Welcome back.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Seattle Channel host and producer and co-host of the podcast Seattle News, Views, and Brews. That'd be Brian Callahan. Welcome back.
Great to be here, Bill. Thanks.
And you can find this show live streaming it's the only reason I got dressed this morning, because the show's on YouTube. Just search for KUOW. You can watch the program. Was anyone here affected at all by the big Microsoft Windows fail that wasn't Microsoft's fault?
It didn't hit our building. We're doing okay.
Okay.
I'm sitting here on a Mac, and so I'm sitting pretty.
Feeling pretty proud of yourself, aren't you? But you did tell me that your library card's not working online.
That's right. Yeah, I tried to log in today, and a lot of stuff is still out because of the ransomware attack from a month and a half or so ago.
Oh, right.
That's still, I can't do that either, and I need those books. That is so frustrating. That's been too long.
So should we feel unnerved that a software update crashes, not hospital, not as far as I know patient care, but appointment scheduling and airline schedules and small businesses and things like that got the Windows blue screen of death? Should that be unnerving, or should we think, you know what, there was a global IT outage, and as far as I know so far, it's only the blue screen of death. It hasn't actually hurt any human beings that I yet know of.
Yeah, and if you can restart your computer 15 times, I read that was one of the pieces of advice. You should be just fine.
15 times?
Yeah,
I hadn't heard that.
Plenty to do there.
But I mean, the scenes from airports have just been incredible.
Yeah.
There's all these, folks posting pictures of their cards. Why am I forgetting the name of those cards?
Boarding
passes. Thank you. Handwritten and
on a napkin.
Yeah, and literal like whiteboards with all of the schedule updates on them. I mean, it's just incredible to see kind of the improvisation that has to happen when you don't have your computer system. So, I'm sure there's going to be some economic impacts.
So it makes me think of, from a systems point of view, to sort of question the interconnectivity, the global cloud, which seems so wonderful, so great, whereas maybe a system where the library, the airport were more independent, not totally interconnected, that they were more self-contained.
Well, was it them being interconnected, or just that they all run Windows and Windows computers?
Oh, it could have been that.
I
don't know.
I think it's that service that they're all buying into that basically failed on
with
them.
updates and changes and things like that.
Right.
Well, and there's some problem with Amazon Web Services too. So, being, a problem if you're trying to do these updates and if you're trying to, I guess, restart 15 times, it's not working because of some interconnectedness problems. So, card catalogs.
If you had an institution or a business and you ran it completely independently, and then Microsoft mailed you a thumb drive and you installed it yourself, you might be better off.
Right. Well, good luck, everybody. I don't know how it's going to unfold. I hear mostly things getting back up to, starting to work again and all that kind of stuff. And it's not like stocks plunge, planes plunge. It's so far so okay. Let's see. Let's talk a little about, before we get to just purely local news, the Republican National Convention just ended. Paul, are you a Republican?
Well, I lean that way, but I
Oh.
always keep my options open.
Okay.
I definitely take it case by case.
Well, what do you? I never thought I would see the president of the Teamsters Union speaking at an RNC. What do you think of the new Republican Party and how it might affect us here?
Well, I might not be a member of any particular party, but I'm definitely a curious political scientist. So anytime that I see a fascinating shift in the dynamic in politics, is always interesting. It always makes me wonder why. Why is the president of the Teamsters positioning himself this way in his organization? And one thing I think he's doing is he's being open. I think he's trying to make the Teamsters endorsement more competitive. From his point of view, it would actually work out if Republicans and Democrats were competing against each other for their support.
Mhm.
And I noticed that when he did,
Nobody wants to be taken for granted.
well, exactly, and it's if you're on one team or the other, then your leverage is reduced.
Yep.
And also, everybody likes to be courted, so I think that's also what he's looking for. And so I noticed that when he gave the speech, it was kind of a fiery speech, but very pro-union, pro-labor. So he's sticking to his principles, but at the same time, careful to not make a specific endorsement. I think he said that specifically. And then the other element I would add that's interesting is making even some of the delegates on the floor who are present, but more broadly the Republican Party in general, some sections of it uncomfortable, like I'm not really sure if we want the president of the Teamsters here.
Yeah.
So that creates, I think, a healthy debate within the party as to how much they want to begin to appeal to labor.
And I hope we see more of that debate because I just saw, even with this Teamsters president speaking there during the speech that President Trump gave last night, this is a situation where he was actually bashing on the UAW there, the United Auto Workers there, and saying you should be ashamed for allowing these jobs to go overseas and these companies to be going overseas, and that the UAW leaders should be fired immediately, and everybody, union, non-union, trust in me because I'm going to bring car manufacturing back. So I just felt some mixed messages from this at the very best, and as much as I would like to see that debate, Paul, I thought that when Trump was really getting fired up towards the end of that speech, which was 93 minutes long, a brand new record there, I think that's where they showed some true colors. That was my thought.
Well, I feel like, I mean, the sort of debate over are the Teamsters, is labor going to, become more Republican friendly? Are Republicans going to become more labor friendly? Is perennial. This feels very familiar to me. There is, a sort of natural alliance between trade unions who tend to be fairly, in favor of, protectionism, anti-globalism, and the Republican Party. And yet, I mean, we have consistently seen that unions tend to endorse Democrats because other values that Democrats espouse, are in line with unions. And so, there's
worker protections.
Worker protections. Yeah, exactly. I mean, the Republicans are not out here saying that we should be giving breaks to, laborers working in the sun during the heat of the day, and other things that labor unions are about. And so I think this is, sort of perennially overblown, this idea that all of a sudden, the Republicans are going to ally with labor. It's quite clear that they're not, but the protectionism has always been, J.D. Vance sort of saying that we need to stop, that we need to weaken the dollar and we need to start exporting instead of importing. That is also very traditional Republican and very traditional labor. It's one place that they have always sort of, meshed. But I don't think we're going to see labor endorsing a bunch of Republicans anytime soon.
The Seattle Times quoted a Republican machinist union worker from Island County here in Washington who was at that convention saying that only one of his 45 union co-workers is a Biden supporter. Meanwhile, Trump seems to be leading in the polls. I've heard Biden will drop out this weekend, and I've heard he's not going to drop out this weekend. Any thoughts on how any of this affects Washington State?
Well, to pick up on the quote that you just read, Washington is a strong union state, and I think going back to my earlier point, to the extent that Boeing machinists and unions that are here in Washington State feel like they're being courted by Republicans. Now, to pick up on what Erica just pointed out, what I'm referring to is sort of Trump's strategy. Whether that extends broader in the party, you have to wait and see.
It's hard to tell.
Yeah, so there are some Republicans running for Congress. There's a governor's race, and so that's where you would look for indications that Republican candidates at the state level are also picking up this message to try to appeal to labor. I haven't seen that yet, but that would be an opening that you would look for.
the less they mention the name of Trump, I would say, and the more they focus on those issues, the more successful they would be.
In Washington State.
I would certainly think so. And
Sure.
I don't think that our state is going to be as much of an impact on the national race. I mean, that's just the fact of the matter because there's a state that has voted blue for so long. But it is interesting to see those different issues and where they can pick up on because, a party under Trump, it's a difficult thing to get out from under, I think, for a lot of Republican and right-leaning candidates in the state of Washington.
Yeah, I mean, we're shoved back to the back of the convention floor, I believe, along with, I think, American Samoa and North Dakota.
There we go.
Our two Republican Congress members did not go to the convention. I read again, Seattle Times pointed out, the only state legislator at the convention was Jim Walsh, the
Republican Party chair of our state.
Chair of our state Republican Party who sort of has to be there. Finally,
but they put Wisconsin and Nevada up front.
Yeah. Finally, I've heard about Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer maybe being a presidential candidate, California's governor. But who's a governor who actually ran a presidential campaign 4 years ago?
Jay Inslee, is that where you're going?
No one. Is he just done? He's.
I sure think so.
Yeah.
I haven't heard any rumblings about
being governor.
That. Yeah.
Lastly, I said finally. Lastly, though, I got an email from a listener, Frank, who says, I listen to Week in Review regularly. I'd be curious to see how your panelists this week feel about the post by Ashley Nurbavig, the stranger journalist, regarding the shooter's near miss of Trump, quote, make America aim again. Any thoughts on? Did you all hear about that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, unfortunately, I am back paying attention to Twitter to some extent, 10% more than I was when I really wasn't. I mean, there's a couple of questions there. What do you think of the post? Well, it was dumb. But at the same time, I mean, I think that the story of that post is how it, sort of reverberated, became sort of amplified, I would say falsely described as a call for assassination. I mean, it was, frankly, a joke that a lot of people were making online and in private.
Yes,
or
the very
some
first
version
joke.
of it.
If that's your best joke,
yikes.
Yeah, you don't need to. But anyway,
but right. So, but I mean, we saw comments like that. I mean, there are jokes all over social media, but Twitter picks its victims, and it picked Ashley. And she was reportedly actually Scott Greenstone from KUOW reported that she's been suspended, and she's gotten
from Twitter.
From the stranger.
Oh, I thought she was fired. Suspended. Okay.
Suspended.
Okay.
And I think it's very scary when social media goes against you like that. If she's gotten public death threats, I'm sure, she's not. I mean, it would be very frightening, to put myself in those shoes. But the post itself, I mean, I didn't say anything like that. I didn't see any other members of the media saying stuff like that. It's not a smart thing to just kind of dash off a dumb tweet and think that, you and your friends are the only ones that are going to see it, or everybody's going to agree with it.
Yeah, that got dirty real quick, and I think there was so much information and misinformation right after the shooting there that spread around, and conspiracy theories within 30 minutes of watching that shooting happen. And so that was the part that I was really trying to track, just that flood of information that was coming through there. And what do you trust, and who are these? What are different people saying about this? And
you just wait for responsible journalists to sort things out.
Yeah,
you don't pay attention.
Yeah. That's the hope. I know, but there's a lot of pushback that I don't know. I think it's important to examine those things as always, and it really did shock me how quickly some of those different misinformation, disinformation schemes were erupting after that shooting.
Yeah, you're right about the timing of it, is that it's a wise thing to pause and think before you throw something up on social media. It also creates the suspicion that, that's that person's true opinion because she expressed it so quickly. You can avoid that by counting to 10, by waiting. I think it's also important to, maintain an interior voice that says, I would never wish harm on another person.
Yeah.
And that kind of acts as an internal check that you don't say something that you regret later on.
Speaking of people saying things they regret, I guess we're going to get to that with the Seattle Police Department a little bit later on the show. One more political note before we take a break. Everybody got their primary ballots?
Getting mine today.
Getting yours today? How do you know that?
You get that little email thing where USPS tells you the mail you're getting? It'll revolutionize your life, Bill. Yeah.
Yep.
I don't know about this.
We'll talk about it after the show. It's
Is
the way
that
to go.
the option? Would I stop my mail for a vacation. They'll ask me something about whether I want to be notified.
We've got a lot to review, Bill.
I
Yeah.
did not know that.
It's a
Okay,
thing.
sorry.
It's a thing.
So 2.5 weeks to vote. You have till August 6th. Then the general election is in November. And there's this big debate over what language you should see on that November ballot. You're going to vote on at least 3 state initiatives, and opponents of those Washington initiatives want the ballot to tell you how the initiatives would affect the state budget, that there'd be less money in the state coffers. Am I getting that right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, the people who are against the initiatives, because they think
they would
if
say
voters
that
see
there would
that,
be a decline in future planned revenue.
Yes.
If
So
there's a policy change.
yes, but the supporters of the initiative have sued the state to remove those statements, and the Washington Supreme Court is considering it. Paul, are you against budget impact statements on your ballot?
Yes, and the key word there is on the ballot, because I think that the information that comes from election officials or the Secretary of State or the clerk of elections at the county level should be as minimal and neutral as possible, without the hint that there's spin or information. And, I work with Olympia all the time with committee reports, with OFM, fiscal notes, and even with the best of intentions, they often turn out to be wrong. And then maybe there isn't the best of intentions. So if there's a kind of suspicious hint that there's some spin being put into whoever writes that ballot information, I think it's best for the state to provide minimal information. I like the fact that the voters pamphlet has a pro side and an anti side, which is written by outside people, so that this is what the advocates are saying and this is what the opponents are saying, and the voter can balance it. What I'm not comfortable with is when the state begins to say this is official neutral information. I think it's better for people to do their own research.
Well, I mean, I think people don't do their own research. That's an optimistic, sort of prediction for people who are looking at a ballot with many, many, many options on it, from the top of the ballot all the way down to local races. But I think that, if we sort of go down that path, it gets very conspiracy minded very quickly. I mean, we're talking about a 15-word maximum statement that says, in neutral terms, here's what we estimate this will cost. And when you're talking about something like a tax, or a tax cut, that is something that would be on a piece of legislation. I mean, if you are looking, you mentioned fiscal impact statements, that there is a process for creating those that is well established, at the state level, at the local level. It's on every piece of legislation that has a fiscal impact. Putting that on the ballot, to me, is just more information. Of course, it's an estimate. Of course, it can be wrong. But I don't think that, we need to go down the path of local elections offices, thinking that they are somehow trying to bias things. And frankly, like, a lot of people like the idea. I mean, Republicans like the idea of cutting the budget. So if you see, this is going to reduce the budget by $100 million, I would think that for some people that would be good news.
Yeah, I would almost argue that the statement they were talking about for the long-term care bill specifically, this is
making the long-term care program optional.
That's
instead
right.
of mandatory.
2124 is the initiative there. And so the actual phrase would be, this measure would decrease funding for Washington's public insurance program for persons requiring long-term care. You could almost make the argument that is what the initiative writers really want to do here. And that is an argument. I hear what you're saying, Paul.
Then let them speak for themselves.
I guess.
But then it feels biased. I mean, if it's neutral, it's neutral. A number is neutral.
It's a matter of respecting people's ability to make an assessment with independent information. And information that comes from the government is not necessarily independent.
Fair.
It is the government saying,
exactly.
We're going to have... what if they had a statement saying, this is going to benefit taxpayers instead of this is going to diminish your state revenue collectors.
I just think a number is neutral. I don't think it says benefit or diminish
except
or
the
harm.
Government has an interest in more revenue. Basically, you're asking the entity that's going to, quote, lose the money is supposed to give you an opinion about whether we should reduce tax burden or not. But why not write it from the taxpayer's point of view?
Well, I think taxpayers also, probably have an opinion on long-term care and whether it should be funded or not. And so then you get into the ballot statements, and that's where that is appropriate. I just think that an amount of money, this is how much money the state will save in some people's, perspective, or will lose in another person's perspective. Just putting that on there, you're allowed to interpret that however you want.
Yeah,
Okay, well,
and-
even right there, the state is not losing money that it's never had. This
I'm
is
stating
all
I'm
in
stating
the
two different
future.
value statements. So you could see it as losing money, you could see it as saving money. I don't think you have to say either of those things. I think that a person could look at that number and say $100 million will go away. Maybe I think that's bad. Maybe I think that's good, but it's stated neutrally. And I just, again, I don't think that most voters have the time or, ability to research independently. And independent research, boy, does that get into a level
Oh,
of...
I have the time. I'm just lazy.
Yeah, well, I mean, I just, are you going to research in detail, all 50 things on your ballot? That is pretty unlikely. I mean, we don't have 100% voter turnout. We have,
Right.
60, 70%.
For the 6 initiatives, you can check out WashingtonPolicy.org, and you'll find a lot
Yeah.
of good information.
Yeah, some great neutral
and some other sources as well, as I would definitely recommend. I guess what I always come back to, especially with these initiatives, that is a very important public process for this state and many others. But it is just so easy, and we definitely saw this with $30 car tabs or what have you. It's just so simple to vote yes. Yeah, I want to pay less.
first of all, officers, just on a technical level, officers are supposed to behave professionally at all times. Whether you're like getting in a bar brawl in private, when you're off duty, or whether you're making comments while you're in your squad car to the union president of the police. So I think,
but a bar brawl hurts somebody. But if he was just overheard saying this at a barbecue, would he have been fired as well?
Well, I mean, first of all, this wasn't a barbecue. He was sitting in his squad car. He was talking to the president of the union. So I don't think that's an apt comparison. But I also think, let's give another example. If he had said something racist that happened to be recorded, yes, I do think that would be an example of unprofessionalism, and that is what he was accused of, is being unprofessional. And there was a racial bias claim as well, and an age. There were other claims in the complaints. But absolutely. I think this is, it doesn't matter if you think that it's private. And Sue Rahr said that, the interim police chief said that in her statement to the police department that she sent out. She said his intent that this conversation was private does not matter because its impact was devastating. And as you said, was to bring dishonor on the whole police department. So no, I don't think it matters that he thought he was being callous and cruel in private.
It was a black eye for the SPD that went international. The story did. The clip you played, people have heard that around the world. And I think it's something that, again, if you're looking at the intent of it, I almost feel like Chief Sue Rahr had very little other choice, at least from her perspective. Now, I know with a case like this, it is going to be appealed, so we'll see where it goes from there. But I just think this was something that...
Who would that get appealed to? Is that a matter of what's in the union contract? Or?
Right. The union would handle that. There is a process that it goes through. All these different types of cases go through that type of appeal process. So we'll see what we're talking about here, because we're talking about a high-up person within the Seattle Police Officers Guild, vice president there. And so, and someone the entire department liked, apparently. But Sue Rahr weighed that, and from what I've seen, looking at that intent, I really saw this as a situation where this is an officer that we have to part ways with if we're going to do the things we're talking about, restore trust with the public, et cetera. That was a big part of this for her, and I saw that in her decision and what she wrote.
Yeah, if there's a bad cop, he has to go. That's the only way you can maintain professional standards. And as was mentioned, as Erica mentioned, if you have to maintain trust with the public. My only sort of practical management point of view would be the Seattle Police long term has to watch their reputation. They have lost 400 officers since 2020. We all see it in the city that there's much less police presence, and they are sort of desperately trying to recruit across the country to bring more officers out of the force. So this is a larger question about whether Seattle has a reputation as a place where police officers don't want to take jobs. That's the big picture. More narrow.
Are you saying police officers would be less likely to want to take a job where you're held accountable for comments?
Well, it depends,
like that?
And that's where it goes to how this case plays out in the grievance process.
Yeah.
Legally, exactly. So then again, that's why I say it's an HR question. It's a management question of, do you just fire the guy, which I'm completely fine with, to say, you cannot work on the Seattle Police Force, it's just way too far. Or he resigns his position with the union, he's put on suspension, or there's some kind of corrective that sends the same message, which is we are maintaining these standards, but doesn't necessarily close the door to employment. But I'm really going beyond this individual officer, which Sue Rahr is going to handle. As you pointed out, she might not have very many options. But I'm really just trying to mention the larger picture over the course of years as Seattle is trying to attract in a very competitive labor market, why top officers would decide to relocate and take a job in Seattle as opposed to some other community. And I think it's that larger reputation that the city has to watch out for.
Yeah, and needs to protect, too. And
exactly.
I think this idea of trying to attract officers who... Yes, this is a city.
Best.
Yeah, right, and that holds this certain level of professionalism. I don't think that's too high a bar to set there. In fact, I think it's an important one to set, and I think that's what Sue Rahr is doing here. And again, she is really she was brought in to right the ship when it comes to what's happening with recruiting, because there are some lawsuits that are facing the department right now, and former Chief Diaz when it comes to being discriminatory against people of color and women. And so I think this is part of that effort on her part to restore some more credibility to the SPD and their hiring process, and I guess the firing process, too, with what happened here.
Yeah, well, I think that, it's very tempting and easy to overstate the impact of hiring or firing, rather, one quote unquote bad cop. I think that the police department has shown that it will make examples of people on occasion, and then they often, get their jobs back through arbitration. Obviously this is, a message that Sue R is trying to send, and I think that her actual message that she sent out was quite transparent, and I appreciated that.
Mm-hmm.
But
she explained her reasoning as to how she got to that decision.
Right. But I think that, overall, does this, have any bearing on, the racial discrimination claims, the gender discrimination claims? I think it has absolutely nothing to do with that. And so I don't think that you fix the culture of the department by firing one cop. And if that was the case, it would have been fixed every time, SPD fired a cop under all the previous police chiefs. And it hasn't done that. So, while I think this is the right decision, I don't think it's like a big, cultural shift or a sign of, anything related to those lawsuits that you're talking about, for example.
Yeah, I hope it's a part of that shift, Erica, is my only take. And in looking at this going forward, we will see what happens with this appeals process, because that's where that's going to be the next public piece of this that people are going to see and say, why did this happen and why did this go this way? So.
And the incident that he was referring to, the fatal collision, the officer who hit John V. in the crosswalk is still with SPD, right? Do we know what's going to happen to him
We don't
yet?
know. And, and that particular officer was fired by his previous department in Tucson, and Publicola has written about this extensively through our reporter, Andy Ingleson, for doing a lot of, frankly, just behaving in very shady ways. He was, had a lot of driving related incidents, and after he got fired, there was an incident involving a DUI, a possible DUI, and then he came out here. SPD knew about his reputation and raised concerns. HR raised concerns, but he was hired anyway and is still on the force. So that's a great example. The talk about it, this callous discussion. Which, by the way, Mike Solon, the head of the union, was half of that discussion, but he's getting off the hook because he wasn't recorded. That has brought way more attention and opprobrium, I would say, than the actual killing of this young 23-year-old woman.
But is SPD allowed to hold any of those Tucson things against him at this point?
Of course they are in the hiring process.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but regarding this discipline, if that discipline were appealed, would they be allowed to take anything else into account besides whether he was chirping his siren or what speed he was going?
No. They shouldn't have hired him in the first place, I would say. Okay. But
I was going to say the same thing.
But we've also reported that he does not have a valid Washington State driver's license. So there's a lot of stuff that SPD has overlooked since he has been hired. That I think speaks to this question of has the culture really changed? Have their standards improved at all if they're hiring people like this? Was he just one bad apple that got through the cracks or whatever, to mix metaphors?
Yeah.
Which seems unlikely to me.
That's exactly right. And that's my point about Seattle have a reputation as a great place to work and which is supportive of police, because then you don't have to have an applicant like this. You can just reject that person outright because you have so many better applicants coming along. So the idea is to broaden the talent pool as much as possible to get the best officers to come to this city.
Yeah. Speaking of crime, this week the Seattle City Council got tougher on street racing. Have any of you seen a street race?
No, I live near Alki, so I'm familiar with this.
They happen,
yes.
near there. In fact, this is a West Seattle resident, Greg Drobnik, testifying about it.
The noise, the confusion, the racing, the killings. I've witnessed 2 cars going over the embankment in the last year down there from street racing, and people getting hurt, people getting injured, and it scares the daylights out of everybody.
The videos I keep seeing of so-called street racing is really just cars spinning around in an intersection, and while the car is spinning, people crowd around it because it's thrilling, anyway, the city council agreed that this has to stop, and so there's now a $500 fine for the first street racing offense, increasing up from there. Not just for the racer, but the owner of the car would get fined. Is that going to stand up in court?
Yeah, that'll be a test, and I think this is something that the city is pushing for, and they're also pushing for this piece that bystanders who are there would face a civil infraction as well.
If you're there and the police tell you to clear out and you don't, then that's an infraction.
It is, and I don't know the legal background on this. Will it be challenged in court? It could very well be, but at least the logic behind it is, it's not just this street race between two cool sharks going side by side, if I can quote the Beach Boys. It's one of these situations where you've got these cars going at each other, and you've got all these spectators, and you've got this social media. That makes the event, right? So if you don't take away that spectator part, then this whole phenomenon of street racing is going to continue.
What if you watch on social media and the drivers are only doing it to get social media hits? Aren't you culpable? And therefore, you need to just mail in your fine for watching the video.
Let me get Instagram on the phone. Yeah, that's the next stage of this, I guess.
Well, I mean, I've paid a lot of attention to this just because I find it sort of, this new city council I've written about a lot, the fact that they really haven't passed any substantive legislation. This came down from the city attorney's office. It's a $100 fine if you're a spectator, and $500 up to, I believe $1,500.
$1,500 for the third one, yeah.
For the third offense. And, the city council is saying that this is going to have a deterrent effect. There is already a fine of up to $5,000. You can go to jail for this. It is a gross misdemeanor at the state level. So
yeah, this is already illegal.
It's
Reckless
already illegal.
Driving, right?
It's a gross misdemeanor. And so the city is tacking on this little civil infraction and saying, oh no, this is going to be the thing that deters those people that aren't deterred by the $5,000 fine and the 364 days in jail. And I just think that's extremely silly. It's also a very large fine compared to our other civil infraction fines. So they're saying, proportionally, this is more serious than speeding through a school zone where little kids are present. So I also think there is, and maybe this is fueled by social media, the sort of reaction to these street races. There's the Hellcat in Belltown that has annoyed everybody.
It's the guy driving his sports car.
Being loud. And I think people, by and large,
incredibly fast, by the way, through Belltown.
Yeah, it's dangerous. Yeah. But I think also, by and large, people are annoyed by the noise, as that commenter sort of made clear. It's just an annoying thing to live around.
Yep.
But I don't think this is going to have any kind of deterrent effect whatsoever. And, and I think it's a lot of sort of performative action by the council on this stuff.
Yep.
Well, at least the city is focusing on it and trying to do something. Again, to me, it's all about safe public spaces that are welcoming to everybody. And again, I live near Alki, not as close to, be disrupted by the noise. But there have been shootings there. There have been a couple of shootings in the last year. And that's just really disturbing to feel that you live in a community where it could potentially be that dangerous. The practical enforcement is a problem. Finding spectators, I'm not sure how practical that's going to be. Maybe impounding the vehicles might have more of an deterrent.
And that can happen at the state level.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's already illegal.
So, if you're going to engage in this, you might lose your car. That could actually be a more practical way to get at it. But
shootings happen at concerts or just in parking lots.
Where crowds gather.
At schools, what can you blame this? How can you connect the street racing with the shooting that happens?
Well,
the people who brought guns to the street
right. I'm
race?
not connecting them directly. I'm just saying that it creates a generally unsafe atmosphere in communities, and again, as I say, where you want to have safe public spaces at all time for whatever reason, and gun violence and shooting is one problem, and then street racing is maybe a separate problem with different solutions. That certainly makes sense.
Yeah,
and I think just quickly on you were asking about the owner of the vehicle. I think one reason for that is because, it is, as we've been discussing, there are a limited number of cops, and it is also dangerous for officers to go in and and try to stop these things from happening while they're happening. So
yes, I can see that.
So one thought, I believe, is to use cameras
right.
to get the license plate numbers, and that would involve, you can't tell who is driving the car, but you can go after the owner.
Yeah,
right.
And
that's a big part of it in terms of what the council says is different potentially than what the state's doing here. Is that all right? We've got these body cams, dash cams, etc. that can help us ID these license plates, maybe like a red light camera almost, if you want to look at it that way. So they're trying to figure out different ways, again, with a shortage of police officers out there, to use these officers maybe at a distance, trying to get some of these license plates, etc., so they can handle these things and not get caught up in a situation where, let's say there's 50 cars there. This happened down at South Center not too long ago, involved the Belltown Hellcat. Bring some officers there. These guys are laughing and driving away, right? So if they can have some sort of tool they can use surveillance, and I know there's some different thoughts about
Yeah.
that, but if they can have those different cameras on scene, maybe they can make an impact.
I understand, but will it hold up? Can you punish the registered owner of a car if my daughter's street racing my Prius?
Yeah,
honey,
which she
don't you
might be
dare.
doing right now.
Right now,
Yeah, right.
And I'm held responsible.
Oh boy.
Okay, so anything else before we pause? We basically cover street racing.
Well, I was going to mention the practical enforcement aspect is to find out the registered address of the car and then go there in the middle of the day when the owner is asleep and tow the car away. Because I think these are people who are not on the same schedule as the rest of us.
And have the tow truck burn out as
Maybe.
they're
Yeah.
leaving. Yeah, that'd be good.
Okay, I'd watch that. All right, let's take a little break on KUOW's Week in Review. We'll come back with restaurant wages. The word panic. I saw the word panic in the Seattle Times story. That is the restaurant industry panicked over a coming increase in the minimum wage, and should they be? And of course, we'll give you something to smile about on the other side of this break.
Election coverage should go beyond the rhetoric. NPR News covers the issues, putting you, the voters, at the center of the story.
Support for KUOW comes from Arch Bright, offering HR, safety, and employment law advice to employers through an annual membership. It includes access to the HR and safety hotlines and online salary survey. Details at archbright.com.
Hi, I'm Chris Morgan, host of The Wild. By the 1930s, wolves had completely disappeared from Washington state. But now they are slowly returning, and it's the protected land of a national park that's helping them to survive and bring an ecosystem back into balance. On our next episode, we'll head deep into North Cascades National Park in the footsteps of wolves. Listen to The Wild tonight at 8 or anytime on the KUOW app.
Try that microphone again. You lucky KUOW listener, you have Public Hola's Erica Barnett and Washington Policy Center's Paul Guppy and Seattle Channel's Brian Callahan figuring out what happened this week and live streaming it all on YouTube. I'm your host, Bill Radke. This is Week in Review. The minimum wage that Seattle restaurants pay their staff will rise next year by about $3 an hour unless the city stops it from happening. Here's the story. 10 years ago, when the city raised the minimum wage, restaurants have since then not had to pay their workers as much as the bigger businesses do because restaurants can deduct tips. Well, that bargain is set to end next year, but restaurants are lobbying to keep it going. Erica, as I mentioned, a Seattle Times reporter described restaurants as being in a panic, but they agreed to this 10-year phase-in period. Why should they get another extension?
Well, they shouldn't. I mean, in my opinion, just to editorialize, I mean, they did agree to this. They had 10 years to get used to the idea and to adjust their business models. And some have gone away from tipping and are paying workers, a higher wage out of, whether it's principle or preparing for this, this decision that was made 10 years ago. And the excuses that are being made now are the same excuses that I remember hearing, back when restaurants were paying workers $2.13 an hour, right. Saying that if they had to pay more than that amount, that they would go out of business. And lo and behold, they have not gone out of business. Some restaurants, of course.
Well, some restaurants go out of business.
Some restaurants go out of business all the time. And more restaurants open. I mean, I work in Pioneer Square, and it's kind of an exciting time. With a number of restaurants that are down there that are doing very, very well. You to go in at lunch, you have to wait for a long time. And so, I think that tipping is a system that we need to get rid of. We need to get away from it. It forces workers to sort of, deal or put up with bad behavior often, to ignore sexual harassment, things like that, because your wage, whether you can pay your rent, is dependent on how much you please, random customer who walks in the door. Customers don't want that either. I would rather just pay more up front, not have to, deal with the tip situation and not have to feel like, this person is beholden to me for, to be like sort of the decider of whether they're going to be able to pay their rent and groceries this month. I think that this is a direction we have to, it's going to be, potentially tough, but we have to go in that direction.
Just quickly on tips, you don't see that as an incentive to be a good server, et cetera, and that type of a
And a
deal.
way of
We don't do
thanking
that
them?
with
Yeah.
we don't do that with other businesses. I
that's
mean,
very true.
I my incentive to be good at my job is that I want to keep my job and I want people to keep paying for public cola. So I don't think we need to condescend to one type of worker to say that but you and only you
Yeah.
have to
Everybody's
have to,
tipping now, man. There's
have
a
to
tip.
dance.
There's all
tips,
sorts of stuff.
There's tips in every store I go to.
You mean we don't get tips for being on Week in Review?
Yeah.
Wait a minute.
Can
Yeah.
we change that?
Right. Put a tip jar out
But
front.
do donate to Public Cola.
Oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute.
publiccola.com/support.
There you go. Please do.
So, I just look at this from an economics point of view, which is minimum wage is a price control. It's a scale. So minimum wage is a number, which is chosen by the government or passed by law. It's relatively arbitrary, and whatever that number is has an automatic economic impact on the job market. I always look at minimum wage as its impact on youth employment and shutting off opportunity for people who are trying to get that entry-level job. So younger people, inexperienced workers, immigrant workers tend to get priced out of the market when the minimum wage is set too high. I just think that's a neutral effect that's happening. And so, going to a restaurant in Seattle is becoming more and more of an upscale experience. The sleepy neighborhood cafe where you could get a cheap breakfast every morning is much harder. Family restaurants are harder to run. And that's just because the government has set that number at a higher level. Having said that, I am getting a little concerned because I find myself again in agreement with Erica regarding
Look out.
regarding tipping.
I'm going to take his pulse. Hang on. Yeah.
Got that
And
horseshoe theory
the reason
going.
for that is, I'm noticing that with tipping as well. It's becoming much more stressful, and it's me as a customer. I want to pay people for doing a good job, and if that a compensation is built into the price of the product, that's fine with me. Trying to figure out how much you're supposed to tip and whether you did enough or not, I'm fine with removing that as an individual and just rewarding people for the work that they do.
Paul, I just wanted to look at minimum wage, though, overall, and your thoughts on it. So you see it as an entry-level wage rather than something where people should be working there and getting a living wage from
Right.
it. Okay.
Yeah, so this is a policy judgment is should the government set a, quote, living wage and then calculate what that number is supposed to be? And you can make that policy choice, but if you say that, a minimum wage should be able to support a family of four, that number is going to be very high.
Well, we're certainly nowhere near there.
No.
And that
Well,
is
there
like
you
a
go.
wild
or even
theoretical
say that
situation.
it's a quote living wage for an individual person,
Yeah.
as opposed to saying that it's a flexible employment, it's a second job, it's a teenager, it's a new arrival to this country who's just trying to get started. And again, I'm completely neutral about this. Whatever that number is, if the minimum wage is $8 an hour, as it is in some states, you're going to have a lot more employment at the lower level. If the government decides to set the minimum wage at $25 an hour, businesses will adjust to that. Customers will pay the higher prices, but there will be a lot of people who won't be able to find work.
Well, I don't think that is the case in Seattle right now. I mean, I think we have, I think that is just not reality. I think that right now
there
it's
used to
an
be summer
extremely strong
jobs
job.
all the time. Teenagers used to get 10 hours a week jobs, and that just doesn't exist anymore.
What were you saying?
Yeah, sorry.
I think that it's an extremely strong job market, and so I think that I don't know about this question of teenagers not being able to get first jobs. I don't know that is true. But more to the point, I mean, I think being a waiter, for example, shouldn't just be a first job that you just get rid of. There are people who want to, to do that for a living and bartend for a living and do all kinds of things that, work at a grocery store. I don't believe that we should sort of disrespect those jobs and say that they should just be for, people who want desperately to move on and go to college and do all these.
Yeah, but I'm not saying that.
Well, it sounds like you're saying those
it
are
should be optional, that there are some restaurants that are high scale, pay high wages, and it's a career, great. And other restaurants may say, well, we want a temporary person who's only going to work here a short time.
Well, I think that if
I'm
you
just
do
open to
that, the
both.
economy suffers the problem of, people not being able to, I mean, even if you're, 18 years old. I mean, when I was in college, I worked through college and I worked at places that paid me more money because I needed more money to live. It wasn't because I just liked having money. It was because, a lot of people who maybe are younger or maybe are just, going to be lower income than you or I need to still have that living wage so that they can, live. I mean, that is the concept of a living wage.
This is a classic economics debate
Yeah,
that we
sure
won't
is.
settle here, but we'll watch and see, because the restaurant, lobby, they're trying to get the city council to extend their, if not eliminate it, at least extend the phase-in period, this grace period, and we'll see whether the city lets restaurants continue to deduct tips. Okay, we're just about out of time, so something to smile about. I just mine is an update. Last week we always end the show this way. What do we smile about? Last week I was smiling because Sound Transit is renaming University Street Station to Symphony Station, which is I think will clear up some confusion among tourists, because I've seen it. I've helped people out. Downtown, University Street downtown is not University of Washington Station, is not U District Station. So this week, I'm smiling because I also noticed that every station's now getting a numerical code, which is what they do in Tokyo, where I visited last month. And it's nice because even if you don't read the local language, you can see you're on train line 1, stop number 40, so the next one will be 141 or 139, and when we have that many light rail stations, that is a million years from now.
That's good.
However, everything has a cost, and what's going away is the pictograms. Did you notice that every light rail station has a...
I complain about that every time I get on the train.
Why?
Oh, this is the deer station, but that one's the ram station. But this is the elk station, and that's the moose station.
Yes.
Right.
Well, then this is something to make Erica smile. They're going away.
Truly.
Yeah. Surveys showed few people used them or noticed them. So, but if you're one of the artists who created a pictogram, I just wanted to acknowledge that this week's smile might make you frown or grimace or glower.
Sorry.
Anybody else?
I want to throw out the 90th West Seattle Grand Parade is tomorrow, 11 a.m. at the West Seattle Junction. It's the longest running community parade in Seattle. A ton of fun. My wife and I are the parade announcers.
Hey!
It's one of the coolest things in the world.
Okay,
so,
Brian
see you
in
there.
West Seattle.
Yes, don't throw candy or the Seafair Pirates will get after you. I'm just saying.
Got it. Other smiles.
Well, maybe I took the instruction too literally because I was reading something last night that made me laugh out loud.
Okay, that works.
It's a quote from Flannery O'Connor, who said, faith is what you know to be true, whether you want to believe it or not.
Whether you want to believe it or not.
Right.
Okay, good one.
Well,
Erica.
I have a quote as well from an article that I think everybody should read. I'm obsessed with the Cybertruck and all its many failures.
Have you seen this futuristic-looking vehicle going around? Yes.
Yeah. So
it's from Tesla, is that right?
Yeah, from Tesla, correct. And so there's a piece in SF Gate by it actually ran last week by Drew McGarry. About where he went and got a Cybertruck, rented it for a day, and he called it a loud and lonely truck for loud and lonely people.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think they look cool.
Me neither.
No.
I mean, do you want to be seen in it, driving around town?
I want to be street racing in that
He said
car.
that people, by the way, he said that people would stop and say, I stopped just to laugh at you.
Oh, but that's the part that breaks my heart. I mean, like, I do feel I want to show a little grace for somebody who does think it's cool, which is not me.
Yeah, and people aren't stopping and laughing at you and your Prius, right? Yeah, okay, here we go.
And it doesn't seem like a very practical truck.
No.
I mean,
Yeah,
it
I didn't
doesn't look
even
like
know
you
it was
could
a
use
pickup.
Use it as a truck.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I didn't know that until I read that article that you linked to.
The pickup bed can actually flood.
Oh.
So I wouldn't use it as a pickup. It also can't hold a mattress because it's too small.
Oh wow. Okay, we got to go. Thank you for all those smiles and for the whole show. Erica Barnett, Seattle Nice podcast, Publicola co-founder and publisher. Paul Guppy, senior researcher, Washington Policy Center. Brian Callahan, co-host of Seattle News, Views, and Brews, and Seattle Channel host. Thank you all.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank
you
you
to the whole team.
Thanks.
Kathy Faulkner running the board and all our other support. I'm Bill Radke. See you next week.
Support for KUOW comes from the Recreational Boating Association of Washington, encouraging all who use Lake Union to mind the seaplane advisory zone. When yellow lights flash on the line of buoys, a seaplane is about to take off or land. Lake users are asked to move 200 feet away.